Good morning all, and thank you for joining us for the webinar on Are Your Volume Recruitment Program delivering the quality you need. I'm Purva from People Matters and will take you through the agenda for today's webinar. Candidate volumes have increased by 33% in 3 years, yet 72% of those candidates are considered low to average quality. Volume recruitment can be difficult, but we have new insights that reveal a better way to do things to drive better outcomes. In this webinar, we will discuss about effective solutions to the 3 main challenges facing volume recruiters: how to create an effective employer brand, how to optimize the candidate experience, how to make the recruitment process more efficient. We have the privilege of having with us Shaurav Sen, Executive Director at CEB. Shaurav is currently responsible for business in India and setting the strategic agenda on products across Asia. Prior to joining CEB, Shaurav was with Hindustan Unilever Limited as part of their corporate planning and business research team. Shaurav is currently a member of the Board of Directors of Corporate Executive Board India Private Limited. He is also a member of CEB's Corporate Strategy Council and the Global Leadership Group responsible for setting and evaluating key policies and decisions at the global level. Our partner for today's webinar for helping us make this program possible is CEB, the leading member-based advisory company that equips more than 10,000 organizations around the globe with insights, tools, and actionable solutions to transform entrepreneurs' performance. CEB's talent management offerings equip corporate leaders to maximize their talent investments by applying the same level of rigor and discipline to talent decisions as they do to other corporate assets. These offerings, which include essential talent management solutions, the industry's most robust talent measurement platform, span the entire employee life cycle from candidate identification through to leadership development and succession management. We have saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of the webinar. For those watching the live webinar, you can submit questions at any time during the presentation through the question and answer section. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows. We have a full exciting agenda for the webinar today, so without any further delay, I'm going to hand over the webinar microphone to Shaurav. Over to you, Shaurav.
Thank you very much, Pooja, and a very good morning to all of you and for taking the opportunity to be a part of this webinar. You should be seeing the title page on your webinar platform with the words "Getting Big Results from Big Numbers." You will notice I'll be sharing quite a bit of data with you, and I'm hoping that you will be able to use that data to shape your decisions as you look at your volume recruitment strategies. What I'm going to do, as you can see on the next slide, is start with giving you a little bit of a backdrop on the recruiting landscape. And as Pooja mentioned, we work with thousands of companies across the globe, many companies in India as well. And over the last few months, we have been increasingly hearing the challenges around volume recruitment. So what I want to do is, before I get into the core of the presentation, I want to share with you some of the data points that we've been picking up across the globe. So with that, let's turn to the next slide and start showing you some data. So you should be seeing a slide with 4 different points of data. I'm going to start with the top left. Again, as you can see, based on our research, we are seeing 1 in 4 candidates are actually applying for jobs at more than 10 companies. So it's not anymore true that a candidate is only sending out resumes to just 1 or 2 companies. On average, 25% of candidates are sending their resumes to at least 10 or more companies. And it's not surprising, because if you look at the top right, we as recruiters often kind of target volume and the source of volume as the primary selection criteria when we go to campuses or when we try and go with a recruitment campaign. On the bottom left, not surprisingly, therefore, this has led to a significant increase in the volume of applications. And I can only imagine how much more harder our job is becoming thanks to the digital age that we are in, where people can, check us out online and submit their resumes immediately without too much of a cost involved. But the key challenge, as you can see on the bottom right, is that almost 3/4 of the candidates, about 72% of the applicants, are actually considered low to average quality. So these are the numbers I wanted to kind of make sure we all kind of familiarize ourselves with. I'm sure some of you face these more than others. But let's see how that impacts, corporate performance on the next slide, slide number 4. And starting again on the top left, about 20% or 1 out of every 5 hires are actually considered bad or regretted hires. And this is a problem because if you look at the top right, 65% or 2/3 of hiring managers are not satisfied with the impact we as recruiters are having on the business. And ultimately, they are the key stakeholders. So if 2 out of 3 of our key stakeholders are not happy with the quality of candidates, then obviously our contribution is going to be called into question. If you look at the bottom left, that's also a pretty scary trend. Compared to all employees, new hires, and by new hires here we mean people who are leaving within 12 months, but 23%, almost 1 in 4 new hires are leaving the organization, which calls into question 2 things. 1, did we do everything we could to make sure that the person we brought on board was truly right for the organization? And 2, was the candidate himself or herself convinced that this was the right decision they had made? And finally, on the bottom right, as you can see, and these numbers can obviously vary based on the size of the organization. Here, this reflects an organization which hires about 2,500 employees per year, almost a $30 million impact, a negative impact, if you will, on corporate performance. So that is why CEB, over the last few months, embarked on this research to really understand, what are some ways in which organizations can overcome some of these challenges. And what we're going to do, as you can turn to the next slide, slide number 5, really talk about kind of the 3 key pillars that we are seeing some of the more progressive organizations start using. And these 3 have to do first with employer branding, next with the candidate experience, and finally, and something perhaps, that I'd want all of us to think through, is to make sure that we are checking for the right things before we bring on the candidates so that, we can improve our recruiting effectiveness as well as our efficiency. So let's start jumping into the first one, which is around employer branding. You should see the next screen that says unlocking better branding outcomes. And this is where I'm going to start talking to you about what is the current approach that most organizations are using when it comes to employer branding, and what are some of the ways in which they can perhaps change that so that the employment brand that is being created to target the right type of applicants, not the number, because we know there's already a lot of people applying, but really the quality of the applicants, how can that change based on your branding strategy? So let's move to the next slide, slide number 7. I think we all agree that employer branding is really important. In fact, as we talk to heads of recruiting, and organizations across our membership around the world, 3 out of 4 employers absolutely believe that employment branding is very, very important and does have a very key impact on hiring quality talent. However, what's worrisome is that only 1 out of 3 are doing anything significant to measure its impact. This is worrisome only because there is significant amount of investments, as we all know, that are going into employment branding thanks to all of the different channels and the media options that we have. But if we as recruiting function are not paying attention to the actual impact or the ROI, the return on investment from these branding initiatives, then we are really not serving our organizations at the level we need to. And the reason why we need a much more smarter approach to employer branding and also to track it is highlighted on the next slide, slide number 8. This, I think, is something that we should all pay particular attention to. Job applicants today have access to more information about potential employers than ever before. And I think, as we all know, whenever we have a lot of choice, we also start having doubts in terms of what is believable and what is not so believable. So let me walk you through some of the data on this slide. Okay, our research shows that almost 80% of an applicant's decision to whether or not to apply for a particular company's position is actually being informed by sources outside of the organization. Think about that. We are all investing in our employment brand, and primarily we are using, our own corporate web page, maybe to some extent our Facebook page or a LinkedIn page. But remember that a majority of the information that our target audience is using to decide whether or not they want to apply to our company is coming from outside of our control. So it's very important for us to be able to make sure that we are being able to stand out from that crowd and the noise, if you will, if we truly want to get heard. The second is quite interesting, right? As part of our employment branding, we often encourage our existing employees, for referrals and to really spread the word about the kinds of opportunities that the organization they work for offer. But if you look at the data in the middle of this slide, 45%, almost half of the employees that responded admitted to not being completely honest when they tell others about their employer. Now, it is not that they are misleading, in terms of negative stuff. So I'm not suggesting that 45% of people are giving, incorrect or negative information. Interestingly, what is often happening is that sometimes our employees are exaggerating the opportunities or are creating certain promises in terms of what their friends can get as part of being a part of that same organization, which can sometimes appear to be inflated, or exaggerated, which creates some credibility issue, which I will again talk about soon. And finally, and the reason why I said more choice often creates more doubt is on the right-hand side you see 69% of the applicants, even though they're being constantly bombarded with employment branding information from companies, 69% don't know where they would consider applying if they were to suddenly leave their current employer today. Which means even though we're all going out there and branding, we're still failing to leave behind a compelling brand in the minds of our target audience so that a passive employee who actively begins to start looking for a job is not automatically thinking of us, but is getting lost in the noise, if you will, that they're sensing. So why is this important and why is this becoming increasingly challenging? Let's look at the next slide, slide number 9. Look, let's face it, I think over the last few years, the recruiting landscape has changed significantly. Today, our business demands us to look for new talent because of those reasons that you see highlighted on the left. We are often opening up in new locations where, frankly, our existing brand may not mean much. So imagine if you are expanding globally and you go to a market where you've never operated before, but you want to. You cannot assume that your existing strong brand, if you had one in India, will be enough to attract the right skill level or the talent that you're looking for. We're also looking for increasingly different and new skills. In one of our research studies we did a few months ago, the number of new jobs that are coming out there in terms of new titles and impact and scope are significantly different from the traditional jobs that we've been used to even 5 or 10 years ago. Third, I think we all understand this. Today we are operating across generations, whether it's Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, and different generations expect different ways of communication. And finally, many of us, if I'm not mistaken, almost 75% of organizations are going through some form of transformation. It could be a business transformation, it could be a cultural transformation where we're looking for new mindsets. So it's getting increasingly difficult for us to be able to have a strategy, a one-size-fits-all, to be able to brand the employment brand that we want. And that's why on the right-hand side you see 61% of the applicants are saying that they are skeptical about what companies are saying about themselves. And this is important because while we may be believing that what we are saying is believable and credible, 2 out of 3 applicants are telling us that because every company is claiming to be the best employer in the world, they are losing faith and they're becoming more skeptical about the branding messages that they're hearing. And that's why 31%, only 31%, less than 1 in 3, even know who they would apply for if they had to make a decision. So just wanted you to keep this at the back of your mind before we move to kind of a little bit more detail. As you can see on the next slide, we have two big statements: branding for appeal and branding for influence. And before I get into sharing with you what this, some numbers and what it means, let me first tell you what I'm trying to do. I want us all to kind of switch over from the current approach we are all using in the market today, which is on the left-hand side of this page, branding for appeal, and we need to move to branding for influence. At a high level, branding for appeal is essentially trying to be this one-size-fits-all, where you're claiming to be the best possible employer that exists to all applicants regardless of roles, okay? And it takes on a very selling-oriented message, all right? And the focus there is to really go for mass branding or mass appeal, and therefore you end up using any and every possible channel that exists. Branding for influence is a lot more targeted and strategic approach to employment branding. This is where you don't take a one-size-fits-all. Your focus is not on maximizing the channel and the reach of your messages, but your focus is on making sure that you're first segmenting your target population that you want to bring on board based on the roles that you're specifically hiring for, and then really helping those candidates make the right decision to either apply or not apply to a particular role. And if you do this correctly, in other words, if you move away from branding for appeal to branding for influence, you should start seeing some amazing impact. And that's what we've highlighted on slide number 11 with a lot of data points, as you can see. For example, on the top left, our research shows companies that are moving to branding for branding for influence, rather, is getting a 54% increase in the quality of the applicant pool, which is, of course, leading to a higher quality, 22% of shortlisted candidates. And obviously, if you've got a stronger shortlist in terms of quality, your actual hires that you bring on also goes up, which is on the extreme top right, which is 9%. And these are not just the impact on the recruitment numbers. You can see on the bottom left, the people that you're bringing on board have a 2.5 times greater likelihood that they will become top performers in your organization. Clearly, it will also reduce your attrition rate. It's about a 23% decline in the new hire turnover, which is, people leaving within the first 1 year. And then in overall impact, again, that number will vary over a $4 million annualized impact. If you turn to the next slide, which is slide number 12, it contrasts the difference between branding for appeal that you see on the top with branding for influence. So, for example, on the first point, as I said, those who are branding for appeal are really focusing on that one-size-fits-all, where you're trying to create one appealing message that will fit across all segments, as compared to those that's focusing on influence. They're actually understanding that they need to target specific employee segments and therefore customizing the brand message as opposed to just focusing on the core message. Second, those who are branding for appeal is really doing what most sales products are designed to do, which is they're messaging for selling, right? And you can imagine if more and more companies keep claiming that they're the best employer in the world, obviously the receiving audience or the target audience at some point or the other is going to start doubting. And where we see opportunity here is to move that from messages that sell to messages that advise or consult. It's really, branding for influence is really about becoming, the trusted advisor, where you're actually educating your target audience, showing them how what you're specifically offering is specifically linked to the type of interest they may have, all right? And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the focus is not on maximizing the number of channels or platforms, because all of these add up and cost money, But the smarter companies who are branding for influence are saying, let's focus on the messengers and not the platform. So they're going out and doing their homework to understand where do their target audiences typically hang out? Who do they listen to? What are they influenced by? And they're using those channels to be able to get the message across. Okay? So that's what I wanted to share with you on the branding side. I'm going to spend a few minutes going over the candidate-driven experience, which is the screen you should see now on your web platforms. And here I'm going to talk at a high level in terms of what can organizations do. First, to be conscious of the fact that experience matters and why. And then as we move into the last one in terms of efficiency, what are some of the things that they can pay attention to overcome the challenges that we have. So let's go to slide number 14. This is where, once again, I think a majority of HR professionals we talk to tell us that, yes, candidate experience, especially a positive candidate experience, matters. But what's disappointing is only about 40% are actually monitoring this. And it is not that difficult to monitor. Okay, so I urge you to not just say that it's important, but to be able to track and see whether or not, that experience is truly important. Because if things go wrong, it can really hurt you. If you look at the bottom of that page, 1 in 3 who have had a bad experience actually tell their friends about it. 1 in 5 use social media to share that. You can imagine what happens then. That negative experience gets amplified to far more many numbers than just the initial bad experience that one individual had. And some of them take it to even such an extent that they stop dealing with your brand. Okay, they even stop purchasing stuff from your brand. And as I show you on the next slide, slide number 15, look, it is a very, very difficult job that we are all in. What the data shows on the left-hand side at an illustrative level, today, typically, it takes a full day just to screen for one role. And not only that, thanks to the quality of candidates, only about 1 in 3 are meeting the basic requirements. So 2 out of 3 candidates are simply not even worth reviewing. And that's why we are kind of getting caught up in all of this volume and forgetting to pay particular attention to the experience that the candidate is having. And there are some hidden costs that we often as recruiters don't really think about. If you look at the next slide, slide number 16, what I want to point out here is on the top half of the page, there is actually a honeymoon period, right? And we all know that we bring on a candidate for the first time, the first few days, perhaps, the first couple of months, it's all in a rosy period, because if you look at, 2008 and 2013 data, in terms of just hiring manager satisfaction levels, the first few months, there is a lot of consistency. And that is the period where we as recruiters even have visibility. That's why you see we have shown you that kind of light blue bar that's showing in that first few months, we also, from the recruitment function, actively follow up with our hiring managers. We ask them, how's the new candidate doing? And because we're all in this honeymoon period, everybody has positive things to say, and we walk away mistakenly assuming that we've done a fantastic job and that our managers or our stakeholders are truly happy. But see what's happening, okay? In recent years, the blue line, the 2013 line, after that honeymoon period is over, before the end of the first 1 year, there is a significant drop in the stakeholder satisfaction level or the hiring manager satisfaction level. And here again, I urge you to proactively seek out a longer-term measure so that you know where are some areas that you can focus on more. If you look at the bottom, it's not just hiring managers are disappointed when the whole, the right candidate is not brought into place. Even the candidates themselves, 15% less discretionary effort. So when the person has had a negative hiring experience, even when he or she has come on board, maybe there were certain things that were overpromised, and when they came on board, they realized the reality was different. They significantly reduced their effort when it comes to discretionary effort. Same way, they are significantly less likely to stay, almost 40%, 38% are less likely to stay with the organization. So as we go to the next slide, on slide number 17, one of the key things we need to do is to understand is, look, we are not going to be able to give the best candidate experience to every single employee prospect that is out there. And we shouldn't, because as I showed you, only about 35% of the target pool is the one that you ultimately want to go after. And that's another reason, borrowing from the previous section, where branding for influence makes such a powerful difference. If you look at the value chain on the bottom of the slide, what we need to be able to do is go beyond just increasing awareness, because that's what we are, traditionally focused on, and we tend to, create a mass appeal and start coming up with inflated messages. Instead, we need to really start focusing their attention on the employer by sharing with them realistically what something would mean if they were to come on board. We also need to go beyond just building this positive perception of the employer, which is to say we are the best company to work for, and to really put some questions and some data and some guidance in front of them to help them consider and evaluate. It is actually sometimes better to dissuade or to deflect a certain type of candidate from applying to your organization, so that that particular candidate who actually learns more from an experimental and experience standpoint and ends up applying to the organization is always open to the fact that they've had a great experience, and their ability to send negative messages will go down. Okay? So that's the reason why this is so key that we start moving away from branding for appeal to branding for influence, because it does help with candidate experience. Okay, so now let's move to the third and final section of the webinar that we have today, and this is on the page that says, as volume goes up, recruiting efficiency goes down. Here, I'm first going to share some data points. It's something that I think we'll all relate to because of how difficult our roles and the impact that we need to have are getting. But what I'll do is I'll point out an interesting approach that we are seeing more progressive companies take. And perhaps if we start looking into an opportunity to use similar kind of tactics in our own hiring strategies, we might be able to bring on a little bit more efficiency and effectiveness. Okay? So let's move to slide number 19. As I said, I think we as a recruiting function are under a tremendous amount of pressure. As you can see on the data on the top half of this page, about 38% of the organization that we talked to said that their recruitment budget is actually going down. And 36% is saying there's going to be no change. So imagine 75% of the organizations are either cutting budgets for recruiting or are not going to change budgets. Yet, I showed you a few slides earlier that our expectations that we need to now go to new locations, bring on new skills, make sure we are targeting new mindsets and go across generations is continuing to increase, but the budgets that we have are not increasing. Only about a quarter of the organizations, 1 in 4, are saying they're looking at increasing their recruitment budget. That is the reason why we need to get a lot more efficient in the way in which we are evaluating and bringing in candidates. And what's complicating stuff even further is what you see at the bottom of the slide, which is on average, a couple of years ago even, we were looking at only about 6.9 to 7 business units that a typical recruitment function would serve. Now that has already gone up by 50% to almost 10. So not only are the volumes going up, but the number of stakeholders and the nature of the jobs and the roles that we're looking for is also going up. Okay? And when we look internally, when we start saying, okay, what are some of the decisions that we are using, or what are some of the criteria we are using before we make an offer to a candidate, it's not where it needs to be. And that's what we want to show you on the next slide, slide number 20. As you can see here, many, in fact, most people's decisions are still being made only on intuition or gut feeling. In fact, only about 25% or 1 in 4 talent decisions, especially by executives, are using data. Now, this is concerning. On one hand, I don't think that only data should be used to make decisions, because at the end of the day, after all, we are dealing with human beings, employees who we want to bring onto our organization, and it is wrong to distill every applicant into just a piece of information or a data point. But at the same time, I think going to the other extreme, where you're not using data alone, and as you can see here, 75% of executives are only relying on their gut, I think that leads to some serious concerns, because often a lot more subjectivity gets brought in, and you're getting influenced by superficial elements without really understanding the core substance of the prospective employees or the target audience that you want to bring in. Okay, so I would urge you, as you think about your approach and your stakeholder conversations and communication, one of the things I would encourage you is to let them know that you don't have anything against judgment or intuition being used, but to only rely on that can create all kinds of challenges. And feel free to share some of the data that we're sharing with you in this webinar today to create a business case to say we need to start looking at more objective ways of understanding whether or not somebody has the capability, and more importantly, as you will see in a minute, do they have the right fit. Okay, so just wanted to share that one piece of information with you. So now let's go to the next slide, and perhaps this is a critical question for all of us in the recruitment function, because it puts into question some long-held beliefs and some fundamental beliefs we have. And that question is, which of these two, ability or fit, has a higher impact on the quality of hire? And by ability, we're talking about knowledge and skills. So these are things that I think a lot more tangible, touchy-feely, if you will, that you can pick up, whether it is through just pure assessments or through deeper interviews where you engage your candidate in conversations and really probe deeper into their technical capabilities and their skills, or is it the fit? How well will they fit in with the organization? You will notice very clearly that in our call out under the fit box, we don't have the word culture. And I'm sure almost all of you on this call, when we talk about fit, there is a natural tendency for us to use the words cultural fit every time we think about fit. Okay? And this is what we are finding interesting, and I'm going to come back and spend a little bit more time on this in a couple of slides from now. But keep in mind here, we are looking at the fit that the new hire could potentially have with the colleagues and the broader organization that they're going to work with. So hold your thought for a second, because I'm going to come back and unpack this a little bit more for all of us on this call. But let's turn to the next slide, slide number 22. Why is it that we are saying that we should revisit that question, whether it should be, just ability or whether we should look at fit? This is where, right, on this slide, on slide number 22, the two types of new hire qualification, what we are seeing is that more than half, about 52%, is now being explained by the element of fit, and less than half, 48%, by ability. Now, the key message here is not that you should stop looking at ability. The key message here is that don't stop just focusing on ability, which, by the way, many of us do. A, because it's sometimes easy to do. You're using some objective assessments and you want to take a score and make some cutoffs and quickly select some candidates. But what we're getting at is understand that if you want to make the right quality hire, you've got to go beyond ability, okay, and look at this concept called fit. Okay. Now, let's turn to the next slide. Here's what's interesting. When we looked at the data that companies shared with us, 73% kind of were able to see that, yes, their candidates had the ability that they were looking for. Only about 35% of the candidates met the fit requirements. So that's why we have a tendency often to kind of hasten and see, okay, somebody at least on paper seems to have the ability, let's go ahead, because a majority of your candidates seem seem to have the ability, again, depending on the quality of the bar or the assessments that you're using and the cutoffs that you're using. But what's interesting is, when assessing for fit, organizations are seeing that only 1 in 3 or 35% meet the requirements. Now, I'm sure by now many of you are wondering, wait a minute, what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about fit, especially when I said it's not just about culture fit, but it's about something else. And it's that I want to show you on this next slide, slide number 24. Here is what CEB believes, and we are seeing the best-in-class companies move towards. For decades, we have focused on this notion of culture fit. And what do we mean by culture fit? This is how well does the new hire fit with the overall organization's culture. And by the way, it's not bad. If you look at it, you're getting up to a 12% impact in terms of quality of hire by focusing on culture fit. So we are not saying that stop looking at your cultural fit. But what I want to point your attention to is the next set of information that's on the slide in the darker part of the graphic. And to introduce the concept of network fit. Okay? And this is about how well the new hire fits with the way their colleagues actually work. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with CEB's recent work on the new work environment, but at a high level, that work shows you why in today's day and age, because of technology, because of digitization, our need to work collaboratively with our teams as opposed to just being an individual contributor has significantly been going up. So the fact that we really need to be able to pay attention to not only just the individual contribution, which, by the way, is the ability portion that I was referring to earlier, but to understand that somebody who is just capable may not succeed if they are not able to really fit in with the rest of the colleagues or the teams that they're going to be more closely working with. And it is that aspect that we are calling network fit, which is kind of your immediate vicinity of colleagues and peers that you're going to be dealing with. And for too long, we have kind of used cultural fit, which, by the way, once again, I'm not saying we should stop because there is an impact. But if we are going to really get effective and efficient in our hiring processes, I urge you to consider the notion of network fit, because the overall maximum impact on the quality of hire is more than double of just culture fit, which is about a 30% impact. And the way you do that is not just, think about the fact that you need to highlight what the organization is all about and what the culture of the organization is all about when you're having a discussion or an interview with the candidate in terms of, whether they have cultural fit, but to really engage with them in a deeper conversation and give them a realistic sense of what their team is all about. When you're hiring, to not look for somebody who has every single quality that you're looking for on paper, but to actually find people who will complement some of the gaps that currently exist in a team that they're going to join, so that that team will be more proactive to bringing and working with somebody who is adding value as opposed to obstructing somebody because they'll see that as a potential threat. So this whole notion of network fit, and CEB has an entire piece of research on this topic alone, but it's something that I encourage you to keep in mind and to, because culture fit often when we talk to both employees as well as employers, let's face it, becomes a little bit ambiguous. What culture means to you may be very different from what it means to the candidate. But what is a lot more tangible and visible is to share with the candidate, let them perhaps interact with their future colleagues in advance of making a decision, especially after they've been shortlisted. Perhaps, and we're seeing some progressive organizations that are allowing potential candidates to come and spend a few hours, just observing the team that they're going to be a part of and for the team to observe them, before making a final decision. So there are lots of other ways that we have highlighted separately, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that. Let's very quickly, show you some of the economic benefits of focusing on network fit. And with that, if we turn to slide number 25, again, the dollar amounts, don't matter. It depends on the size of the organization. But the graphic on the bottom left says, increasingly we are seeing organizations with new hires that are showing or demonstrating network fit have a significant impact on overall business unit profitability. And on the bottom right, as you can see, it also reduces new hire attrition or turnover significantly as you have more and more of your candidates with network fit. And this is quite intuitive, right? Because if they're already fitting in well with their colleagues and with the environment, the reason for them to quit is a lot lesser. So as recruiting heads, where can we have the impact? And that's what we want to show you on slide 26. We believe that as recruiting heads, there are two key opportunities in that kind of value chain. One is making sure that we use more objective ways of assessing for fit, and that's why you see here assessing having the maximum impact, but not assessments done out of context. Defining needs, making sure that you have really thought through the full context for the role and what that specific department or hiring manager is looking for, and tying that into the specific assessments that you're going to design is going to be key. So from a recruiting standpoint, we as the part of the recruiting function need to partner very, very closely with our hiring managers to make sure we're defining needs and going beyond the superficial conversations that we tend to have because of all the volumes and challenges that we face. But to deeply engage, understand what does that team look like? What are some of the key deficiencies that exist in the team as a whole, so that when you go out there trying to bring on a new hire, you're looking, as I said earlier, to find somebody who can complement that need as opposed to just add, the same capability, which will lead to more confusion and detraction. Okay? And then to be able to use, some of the assessments that are out there, whether internal or external, that are mapped onto the needs so that the decisions you finally make do make sense and you realize some of the economic benefits that I alluded to earlier. So we are very close to kind of opening this up for conversations. And before I do that, I just wanted to share with you just kind of a framework that we are increasingly seeing what some of the best companies are doing out there to kind of really overcome their volume recruitment challenges. And, you see here on this slide revealing what the best companies do. So if we move to the next slide, there is a schematic, okay, that we have put up there. It's an illustration, but it's something that, I'm sure some of you are already using something similar, but I just want to plant some seeds before I open it up for questions and end the webinar, okay? So here is what we are showing you. When it comes to volume recruitment, your ability to filter and your ability to combine online and offline channels is key. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be efficient and effective. And if you think about the overall end-to-end process, okay, and by the way, some of the leading-edge companies that we work with are actually using this kind of an approach, and that's why I wanted to share this with you. If you go from the top of the page where it's, you see those numbers, the letters rather, alphabets, A, B, C, D, E. So here is the way it works, right? Right up front, and this is taking us back to the conversation we had about branding for influence, okay? Educating is a critical part of that first step. You want to educate and then attract the people who will most likely consider that education to be valuable and see the connection between what they have to offer and the opportunity that you have to give them. And leading companies are doing this through, online mechanism for example, by creating realistic job previews. Okay, these are essentially animations, web-based animations, often, showing a sense of what would it look like if you were to come on board. Kind of giving you a multimedia experience and teaching them in terms of what is it that this role is about, so that as soon as a candidate sees that, if he or she is really intrigued, they continue that conversation. If they are not, they drop off. And as I said, branding for influence is not just about attracting for mass appeal, but to really be selective and make sure you bring on the people that you truly want to bring on. Once you've done that, you move to B, the letter B, which is about sifting out, right? Before you start selecting in, we need to sift out, again, because we're talking about thousands and thousands of candidates. Here again, while we see a lot of companies use just pure numerical and ability assessments to sift out. We are seeing, more progressive companies use something called situational judgment tests, or SJTs. These are essentially scenario-based assessments. They can be animated or they can be text-based. And it really kind of creates a very real simulated incident and asks to see how the candidate would respond in such a situation. Okay? And it's connected to some underlying competencies. So, for example, in our world on the CEB SHL side, it's connected to our universal competency framework. So it can kind of help you understand what are the specific areas that this particular simulation can help you evaluate. But it's something that companies use often to sift out anywhere between 30 to 70% of the applicants that they're getting. There are some companies we work with who are literally, evaluating 40, 50, 60,000 candidates, and they want to sift out 60, 70% so that they can focus on only those that matter. Then we move to step C, which is about selecting in. And this is where we are increasingly seeing the value of this notion of network fit. What do I mean by that? While ability assessments are really powerful, because as I showed you earlier, ability does matter. But if you're just going to focus on ability assessments and make a decision, then don't be surprised if your attrition or your new hiring manager satisfaction surveys, don't show the kind of results you want them to show, because you need to look for fit and fit with the rest of the team, and as I said, the broader organization as well. And that's where we're seeing many organizations actually use, various personality kind of questionnaires. On the CEB SHL side, obviously there is the OPQ, the Occupational Personality Questionnaire, but there are many other organizations who offer you personality questionnaire. And the main reason, by the way, that most companies only use ability tests is because, they feel the numbers are so high, it will be prohibitive from a cost standpoint to use personality assessments for so many. And that's the reason why that the smarter companies are using a simple screening out tool, which is that SJT, or the scenario-based assessment in step 2, to screen out, a majority of the candidates, and only to those who make it into the next step, they're giving this combined personality and ability assessment to understand the employability potential of the graduate that they're trying to hire. So it's a very powerful way of spending your dollars the smart way, as opposed to just taking whatever dollars you're giving and only using ability tests because that's your cheapest option. But just being cheap or cost effective is not necessarily translating into higher quality. Now, as we move into that final stages of the pipeline, we start getting offline, right? This is where you start bringing in the candidates to validate. Sometimes you do this through, actual validation or assessment centers. Sometimes you do this through, interviews, behavioral interviews, for example. And ultimately, once you've got all of this information, you decide to deploy, which means, you put a candidate who's exceptional on a fast-track program and so that they can hit the ground running, or you realize that some of the candidates may need some additional help in terms of coaching and training them before they can be ready. So as I wrap up, I want you to, think of this framework in your mind. Think of your existing volume recruitment strategy and your process. See to what extent you are already doing pieces of this. Ask yourself, are you spending enough time educating your prospective applicants, okay, so that you're no longer branding for appeal, but you're truly branding for influence, which is all about advising and educating? Then ask yourself, do you need to use only an ability assessment for every single candidate, or can you perhaps use a two-step process where you screen out, and by the way, that SJT I was referring to, literally just takes 10, 15 minutes, and the candidate on the spot knows whether or not he or she can go to the next filter. So you're not adding unnecessarily to the process, which I know many of us in recruiting are nervous about because you don't get a lot of time, on campuses to do this. But then to really kind of start going beyond ability, which anyway you should be looking at, but to push beyond ability to understand the personalities and perhaps even the motivations of these employees to see how well or how poorly they might fit with the team that they're coming on board for. so that ultimately when you make a decision, either through the validation process of an interview or an assessment center, the probability that you've brought the right person on board is as high as it can be. And that is what brings you the efficiency and the effectiveness that we're all looking for. So with that, let me turn it back to Pooja to see if there are questions that have come in. We have a few more minutes today, but I hope I was able to give you a quick backdrop overview in terms of the challenges that we in recruiting face, and there are many. And the reason we shared so much of numbers with you is because we believe you will need to use some of this data and these numbers to create or justify internal business cases to revisit your volume recruitment strategies. And I hope this whole notion about moving away from branding for appeal to branding for influence has triggered some ideas in your minds, so you ultimately get to the effectiveness and efficiency, especially if you're going to use this kind of a framework that not only sifts out but also selects in using information and assessments that go beyond just cognitive ability and starts introducing some personality-related assessments, so you get to this notion of network fit. And as I showed you in the data, companies with more and more new hires with network fit are giving some significant returns to the organizations that they're joining. So let me turn it over to Pooja to look at some of the questions that might be coming in. Over to you, Pooja.
Thank you so much, Shaurav. That was indeed very, very insightful and very helpful. We have a few questions. So Mandeep wants to know, what are the best modes to use to educate and attract?
Sorry, what are the what?
What are the best modes to use to educate and attract?
Oh, okay. So, Mandeep, thanks for the question. As we talk to organizations, obviously they start with their own websites and their own LinkedIn pages. But as I said earlier, 80% of information that's being used is outside of that control. So what we're seeing leading organizations do is first they define what is the specific role or segment they're going after. And, they come up with some hypothesis around, okay, if this is the specific role that we're going after, here are the kinds of people that are most likely to be interested. And they ask themselves the question, okay, if this is the kind of people that we're trying to attract, where would these people currently be going for their information needs? Are there certain communities beyond just the classic LinkedIn or Facebook communities that exist? Are there certain kind of publications or channels that they are associated with? Are there certain causes that they may get attracted to? And then they proactively go and connect with those specific channels. So the point I'm trying to make here is the goal is not to say, okay, let's just maximize the impact and therefore go educate and build this awareness about everything that we do. But before they rush into it, they put themselves in the shoes of the candidates that they're trying to attract, and then they try and imagine or do research to see where are these people currently going and what are some of the things that excite them. It could be a cause, or it could be a particular piece of content that they seem to be more and more triggered towards. And that's where you start building and educating those organizations, those candidates. Hope that answers your question. Next.
Thank you so much, Shaurav. So the next question that we have is from Gabriel. He wants to know if you could briefly talk about the research that was conducted, how this research was conducted.
The research, yes. So thanks for the question, Gabriel. So CEB, those of you who are not familiar with, and maybe many of you have heard of our Corporate Leadership Council program, which is targeted at CHROs, but many of you may not be aware that we also have a membership program targeted at heads of recruiting functions and recruiting teams, and that is called the Recruiting Leadership Council. And what we do, just like we do for the rest of our CEB memberships, is every year we reach out to recruiting heads and recruiting teams and try to understand what are some things that are working and what are some things that are not working. And we realized over the last few months of this research that there was this huge challenge around volume recruitment, and we went out there and we did a very detailed survey that was sent out globally and it had multiple, if I'm not mistaken, almost 300 plus organizations participated with several hundred recruiting heads. And we tried to understand what was their current employment branding approach, what was the current criteria they're using, how many of them are looking for culture fit. Then we looked at, hiring manager satisfaction scores, and we analyzed and evaluated those, and we kind of came up with the key research findings that you see here. We also coupled that, as you can imagine, with SHL. CEB acquired SHL a few years ago, and SHL has been working with thousands of recruiting organizations because we deliver 30 million assessments. So not only do we have data on network fit versus ability, because that's what we are constantly collecting, but we are also talking to recruiting heads and getting their perspectives. So we've used a combination of these resources to be able to share with you some of the data and insights that we did today. Hopefully that answers your question. Pooja?
Yeah, thanks so much. So the next question that we have is from Vinita. So when you're talking about cultural fit, so she wants to know that if we can replace the word cultural fit with the word emotional intelligence.
Yes, I can see why you're asking that question, but I think emotional intelligence is a little bit more closely aligned to the network fit because, let me simplify this, right? When you're a new hire coming into an organization, it's really very, very difficult right from day one to understand what your culture of this organization is all about. And even there, if you, let's say, are ranked high on emotional intelligence, without first knowing what is that core culture, it really doesn't matter whether you have the right level of EI or emotional intelligence to necessarily fit in at that much more broader and often ambiguous state. I think emotional intelligence has a lot to do with, how are you adapting and coping and behaving, with your immediate peers, your managers, or if you're at a senior level, maybe your direct reports. So I would say that it's really not about replacing the cultural fit with emotional intelligence. I think it is more closely linked to the network fit. And again, network fit I know it's a relatively new concept, but it's amazing how many companies we're talking to today are building that concept in, where they're saying, look, cultural fit is, yes, at a high level you share what are the values and the ethics and the history of the organization and what is the expectations, which is important. That's why I showed you that slide. It still has 12% impact. But when we can push it further and try to see whether or not, this person has the right IQ as well as EQ, the emotional quotient or the emotional intelligence aspect, to not only bring the ability we're looking for, but also the ability to effectively interact with his or her peers or his or her team, because in today's day and age, working without collaboration is just not possible anymore. So I would say it's more closely aligned to network fit and often forms the basis for some of our recommendations. Can we take one more question, Pooja, if you don't mind?
Yes, of course. We have, since we're talking about cultural fit, Jagan is asking whether behavioral interviewing will be a cultural fit for the new hire.
Yes, Gagan. Look, behavioral interviews obviously will start giving you some predictive elements in terms of, again, the broader cultural area. But again, I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody, but in fact, let me use my own example, right? I struggle, and I've hired a lot of people in my career. I struggle to really, really articulate in a way that the candidate will understand what I mean by our organization's culture. Of course, we all use the standard words, right? Okay, we believe in openness, we believe in creativity, we believe in meritocracy. Of course, we all do that. But trust me, if you are interviewing with 5 companies and they all start talking about their cultural fit and their cultural capabilities, expectations, very soon they're going to start sounding very similar. And that's why I think on the behavioral interviewing side, it gives you a much more deeper sense of their network fit, because you're understanding at a deeper level what is their core personality, what are some of the underlying behavioral components, and you're doing that not against the backdrop of the entire organization, which I'm sure you'll understand is really difficult to do, but you're doing that against the background of the team that this person is going to be a part of. Okay, it's only humanly practical for us to have a much more tangible sense of the kinds of behaviors that will adapt well and complement well to an existing team of a finite number than trying to directly correlate, your behavioral interview conclusions to the overall cultural fit. Again, it will inform, as I said, to an extent it will be predictive and informative, but I think your behavioral interviews can be even more powerfully used if you look at the concept of network fit. Anyway, I hope that answers your questions. I know we're at the end of time, and I'm going to hand it back to Pooja, but I just wanted to say thanks again for taking the time today from your busy schedules. I hope I was able to trigger some ideas and some thoughts and leave you with some data that you can share with your peers and your leadership teams to see if you can revisit your volume recruitment processes and make it more effective and efficient. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Shaurav. We do have a lot many questions, but I'm sure we can take them offline. So with this question and answer session, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. Once again, we would like to thank today's webinar partner, CEB. Finally, a special thanks to Shaurav, the speaker for this webinar, for his time and invaluable information that he has shared with us today. And I would also like to thank everybody in the webinar audience for participating in today's presentation. We will come back to you with many more. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great day.